We're here at Castlebone Fort, and this is a stone fort. The earthen version of this was a ring fort, or some people might refer to them as fairy forts. And I'm joined here today by Joe McGowan, who's a local folklorist and historian in this area. And Joe has a very interesting story to tell us about the Dara Cú, Joe, and its association with this stone fort here.
Indeed so. It's a fantastic old story. And many people throughout the years, it's 300 years ago actually since it happened. It was in September 1722. Yes. And it was such a horrific event that it has survived for so long. Of course, Ireland at that time was solely Irish speaking, so the ballad originally was composed in Irish and then with an English translation later on. Well, all those years ago, there was a couple down at Glenade Lake, and the lady, as was the fashion of the time, she went down to the lake to wash her clothes. The husband was at home. Treilach McLaughlin was his name, and her name was Grace Connolly, or Grania Connolly. When she didn't come back after an extended period of time, he was thinking to himself, why is she taking so long? And he decided to go down to see what was taking her so long and maybe give her a hand back with the clothes. When he went down there, he was shocked to see that she was lying at the lakeside with the clothes beside her, and there was a beast, an animal, standing over her. And he was quite shocked by this. She was dead because the beast evidently had killed her. So he didn't know what to do. He went back to the house right away, and of course revenge was on his mind. He was going to kill this beast, and there would have been wolves in Ireland at that time as well, so it wouldn't be unusual for a family to have a weapon. So he went back home and loaded it'd be a muzzle loader, and he came back down, and the beast was still there, you know, with a full belly from surfeiting and eating the woman, unfortunately. So he shot the monster, and he was quite pleased with himself. But as he fired the shot, he heard this whistling, they call it the whistling Dara Cú. This noise came down the lake because evidently the partner was watching from a distance, and when he saw his partner being shot by this man, he came to the rescue of his creature, which was the Dara Cú. So Treilach became quite afraid when he heard this, because there was another one now, and he didn't know there could be several of them there. So he went back up home and consulted with his brother, and the beast came down the lake, was following him all the time, making this horrendous noise. So the brother advised him, the only thing you can do is get out of here as fast as you can. So they saddled up their horses and they headed along the mountainside, this mountain that we see here, all the way from Glenade Lake, going back several miles to here. When they went along, there was a strange feeling in the air. It was almost like nature stood still. The birds stopped singing. A silence came about the place. The wind that blew in the trees stopped. Everything became so silent. It was almost like nature itself was watching this happen for death or victory for the brothers. So they came along at great speed until they came to this fort that we're standing in here now. This is Castlebone in Cashilgarran. The horse had cast a shoe, and just to explain, casting a shoe might not seem like much now, but it's the same as if you got a puncture in your car, you'd have to get out and do something about it. So that was the case here also. There was a blacksmith forge here. They pulled up at the blacksmith to put the shoe on. They heard the whistling, this loud whistling and this thunderous noise coming, with the mate of the Dara Cú still in pursuit. So they were absolutely terrified because they could be killed. So the blacksmith said to him, the best thing that you can do is get your horses and put them across the entrance to the forge. And when the beast comes, he's going to make a drive, and he'll go right through the horses. And when he does, he handed him a sword, handed McLaughlin a sword. He said, when he puts his head through the horses, you take the sword and cut his head off. So they were ready to go. The horses were across. The Dawarku came closer and closer. When he came, he shot right through the horses. The head went right through there. He was such a powerful brute. And when he did, they got the sword and cut his head off. So that was more or less the end of the story. The brothers were quite relieved. But the end of the story is that we're delighted to still have this stone fort here where this actually happened. And tradition tells us that the Dawarku is buried right around here on the outside those stone walls.
And one of the other things, Joe, that we find is commonly associated with ring forts, castles, fairy forts are of course the fairies.
Indeed.
And that these are where the fairies live
Yes,
under
indeed.
the fort.
Yeah.
Do you recall stories connected with ring forts and,
Well,
fairies?
There are many stories circulated long ago around the countryside up to the present time of they were called fairy forts, and the reason they were called fairy forts are, ring forts or they were more often referred to as fairy forts because this is where the fairies were said to live. They would live in hills or in these forts. Of course, they were the descendants of the Tuatha Dé Danann, the magical people who existed in Ireland at one time until they were defeated by the Iron Age Celts and driven underground to forts and hills and places like that. It was considered unlucky to remove anything, even a branch of a tree or stones, from a fairy fort. It would bring bad luck. And there are numerous stories around the countryside of people who interfered with a lone bush, which is another tradition. Or there's one particular story that comes to mind at the moment is a man not so far away from here, passed on now he has, who saw a bit of land like this and he thought, I'll grow some potatoes there. So he went in and scored a few ridges to plant the potatoes. But they never did well for him. And eventually the man himself came to a bad end. He fell into bad health. And that's what happened to people. If they call them the gentlefolk, and if you're good to them, they'll be good to you. But if you interfere with them, they can wreak a revenge on you. And a while ago there were many stories about the fairies, and people were very cognizant of the fairies and protective of them as well.
Yeah.
Of course, there was the tradition too of turning the coat inside out.
Yes, and that is a protective way of protecting yourself from the fairies if you're in a certain situation.
Certainly, yes. The fairies could be very mischievous. I suppose to pass the time, like children, they would put people astray at night. And there are many stories of people getting put astray at night in Mullaghmore, all over Sligo and other counties as well. But one of the ways of breaking the spell, and it was very difficult to understand because people walked across the fields to neighbours' houses that time. They never went along the road or drove in a car. This is why people don't see fairies anymore so much, because we get into our car now and we travel down the road in a blaze of lights. And I often say, sure, the fields could be full of fairies at night. Who walks across the fields at night anymore, or by ring forts like this to see where the fairies are? But there are many instances of people going through paths that they knew all their lives and not being able to get out. They couldn't find the path, they couldn't find the stile on the ditch where they would get out. They would go round and round. But there would be one knowledgeable person in the group, and they would know from the old people and from tradition that if you take your coat off and turn it inside out, it breaks the spell.
Well, thank you for that, Joe. That was very interesting, and I think just to be on the safe side, leaving this fort, I'm going to turn my jacket inside out.
Well, it's a very wise thing to do, Tamlin, and thank you for asking me.
Thank you again.